I am so excited for today's guest, Dylan Vassallo, who's joining us from OpenAI. And Dylan and I go way back. You were an intern at Khan Academy. I'm having a bit of like a mama bear moment coming in of like seeing how you evolved and grown. But now you're doing amazing things at OpenAI. And the way in my head I'm internalizing it is even though you have a fancy title like leading the people innovation team labs, which you can tell us more about, I'm like, you're my dream of like having an engineer doing HR stuff. Cause I feel like I always, when I was in seat as a head of people, was going to the engineers and trying to convince them to work on people things. And you actually are on an official formal team at OpenAI whose mandate is to do this. Can you share a bit more about your professional journey and what you're doing today at OpenAI?
Thank you for having me. I feel, so lucky to get to work on this stuff and definitely have like a real soft spot for our time at Khan Academy for sure. When you and I met, that was my first like kind of real tech internship and my first taste of how amazing it can feel to build technology with a really mission-driven team and support from a manager who really gets it. And that kind of set the stage for the rest of my career. I spent a few years at Khan Academy, a bunch of years at Stripe, where I worked on first developer productivity and then internal tools. And that's where I became a manager. And as a first-time manager, I was really, really lucky at Stripe to get a lot of really good, informal mentorship plus kind of formal training. And that's where I really fell in love with the people-y aspects of the engineering manager role. There was the engineering side that I was familiar with, but I started to just like really love the people side, kind of weirdly more than a lot of my peer engineering managers, I think. So that kind of told me something about where I wanted to go with my career. After Stripe, I was at a couple of startups and then felt kind of called back to go to one of these hypergrowth companies. And in 2024, when I joined OpenAI, there was no better hypergrowth company to join, I think. So when I joined OpenAI, I started out managing a team that built what recently launched as ChatGPT workspace agents, I think we're calling it. And about a year into my time at OpenAI, I switched over to this People Innovation Labs team because I realized, as fun as it was to kind of build a generalized platform for kind of productivity across the enterprise, I really was excited about the people domain specifically. So that's where I'm at now, is kind of working on applied AI in the people space, which I'm super fortunate to get to do.
Yeah, what's super exciting to me is I think you're our first like truly technical engineering leader to come on the podcast, but you come at it from such a unique lens of building for people teams. Can you share more about why the People Innovation Lab was created and maybe what some of the focuses or projects that you're working on this year as part of that?
So I think in a lot of ways, OpenAI has been playing catch up ever since ChatGPT launched in 2023, I think it was, and really kind of took the world and the company by surprise. Our org leader, Kadrian, founded People Innovation Labs in 2024, kind of as a response to the organizational strain we were feeling, where it was all hands on deck scaling ChatGPT. And we had a lot of those organizational problems that are probably familiar to people in growing companies, where information was everywhere, the culture was not scaling, there was nothing to really help it scale, and employees were really missing just a set of verified internal resources for navigating their time at the company, everything from benefits to recruiting to what have you. And the team's first internal product was called Open House. And this is really kind of an intranet, but very AI native, very AI enabled. And it solved this by scaling that organizational knowledge, making the org more discoverable. And it acted as kind of a centralized surface for more AI enabled people products that we've built since. And our mission is really to help attract and retain and help employees do their best work through the use of Open House and the other products that we have. And since I joined People Innovation Labs last year, we've been continuing to build out Open House. It used to really just be focused on that information retrieval piece, which was important to get right, but now really focused on also helping people take action within the system. So if you need to write interview feedback or write performance review feedback, or if you want to send kudos to a colleague or submit referrals or host an internal event or any number of kind of things like this, Open House is where you go. And in parallel to this, we're also building out sort of a specialized suite of tools for our recruiting team as well to help them perform their roles. And then there's a lot of interesting product challenges there too.
Dylan, first from my end, thank you again for joining us. Really excited to learn from you. And it feels like your team and OpenAI are really on the bleeding edge of AI and hypergrowth in so many ways. I'd love to follow up on some of these tools that you and your team are building inside OpenAI. You've clearly embedded engineering, product, design, inside the organization to support the people team. What you're describing sounds a lot like the intranet of old. and some of your own, maybe an ATS tool or sourcing tool. I guess I'd ask, why not just buy rather than build? Buying something that works, that maybe people are already familiar with. What's behind the rationale to build it yourselves?
There's a few sort of angles to this. A lot of companies that are like OpenAI, where they're sort of, engineering and design driven, I think there's always that instinct to build. We have a vision for what looks great, but I think what goes underappreciated sometimes is just the depth of some of these systems that you can buy, where our team is quite small. We have about 14 engineers right now. It would take us a long time to, say, replicate the depth of something like Workday. And so I've grown a real appreciation for these systems and why they exist. And I think there's a reason they still exist in all these companies. But where I think more of the appetite is for building layers on top of these systems that are really sort of adapted to the design culture, the people culture, just the ways of working and the ways of interacting. That's been our team's model for a while now. And I think that's working really well, where, of course, we have, an ATS and we have Workday and we have like a performance management system. And those are really deep and complex and useful for all of the kind of back office use cases. But for employees, we're able to provide this layer on top that's a lot more coherent. It simplifies things down to, here are the paths that we want employees to take. And so that's where we found success focusing most of our energy is on that layer and making that just really well designed and really usable and really fun for people to use.
This is such an important nuance, and I want to reinforce this, I think, for our listeners. What I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, is that your team and OpenAI aren't trying to recreate core tools from scratch, an HRIS, an ATS, a performance management system. What you're trying to do is add functionality, add features, make it more user-friendly, make it more useful, instead of trying to build your own thing from scratch to avoid paying for it or make it special. Is that right? And let's hone in on this, because I think you're right that so many startups have that knee-jerk reaction to say, well, we'll just build it ourselves because we're special and we'll do it better.
Yeah, I would even add to that and say it's less about adding functionality and more kind of focusing the existing functionality and presenting it to employees in a way that is giving them these paved paths where we as the people team can say, here's how we think referrals or performance management or interviewing should be done at OpenAI. And our systems on the back end can support way more workflow than what we need at OpenAI, or they have way more optionality than that. But we don't want to present that to every employee because, one, it's not necessary. Two, it can help people kind of veer off the paved paths, and then you end up in kind of outside of operational workflows that you want people to take. It's really a way to present things to employees in a way that respects their time and energy the most, where they can come into a system that we've built and there's only, one way to leave interview feedback, or there's only one way to submit a referral, and it covers kind of all of the operations that we do internally and really fully support. And you don't get into the weeds in some corner of Workday or ATS that is going to get confusing or is not supported by us operationally.
I love this simplification element that seems to be the core of your team's purpose, which is we don't want to confuse our employees. There's enough things for them to be thinking about and doing. And so how do we have these very streamlined ways for them to do things so they don't have to think so hard about it? They can just leave the employee referral or whatever the path is that you're building for them. The other piece I want to pick up the thread on, some of these pre-built HR systems, they think about all the edge cases that would actually take a really long time to figure out and be able to build for. Like the 80% version of any of these things probably is reasonable to try to figure out or build and spend some time in, but that last 20% actually takes a really long time. And I'm hearing your team has made a very intentional decision of we don't want to spend our time there. It is not worth it. And it's been much better to kind of build this layer on top. Where I'd like to take this conversation next is just even the super tactical of when we talk about paved paths, does this mean you're building things so people don't need to log into Workday, or what does this actually look like? And maybe one example of a paved path that your team has built and what makes it simpler.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation of it. We want to provide sort of a layer for employees where they ideally don't even have to touch Workday or our applicant tracking system or our performance review system. A good example is our feedback assistant that we have, which is a way for employees to draft peer feedback, upward, downward feedback. That pulls data in from Workday, so it knows your level and ladder, and it knows what the expectations are for you or for your peer, your manager, whoever you're reviewing. And then it pushes that data into our performance review system. And by stitching those things together, we can provide just one interface for everyone to go to where they don't have to click around in these two different systems. And that's really the goal and what employees have really responded well to, because everyone's busy, right? Everyone's doing a million things. They have the people team telling them to do things. They have the finance team. They have whoever else is all kind of, telling them to do things that for them are not necessarily core. They're like, oh, I want to, ship the next model or what have you. And so the easier that we can make that and the more user-friendly we can make that, just the higher chance of success we have at completion rates for all these things. And that benefits everyone.
I'm wondering, is this sort of, building the paved paths, improving user experience and workflows, at what size and stage is it worth doing this? Is it largely because OpenAI has already thousands of people and still in hypergrowth? Is this the sort of thing that enterprise organizations should no-brainer be thinking about doing? But how small is an org where it's still worth it to do something like this?
My gut is that I think you cross the threshold once you start to need internal solutions that have to satisfy a lot of compliance requirements, because I think that's where a lot of the complexity comes in. And I think if you're a smaller business, for example, I've worked at places that have used Gusto. I know Jesse used to work at Gusto. Gusto is pretty easy to use, right? We don't need to build a layer on top of Gusto. And for a company that is well suited to be using that, then that's totally fine. But if you get into, needing a Workday or something at that level, that's when I think it starts to become, powerful for the employees that need all of that functionality. And they're in the back office and they're satisfying all these compliance requirements and things that they need to do legally and all that. But that complexity can then kind of start to spill over into the employees. So that's kind of my gut sense for where that threshold is.
So it's not necessarily size of the organization, but it's the complexity of their working environment and maybe complexity of the interface. Usually, power of the tool is highly related to complexity of the interface. Mm-hmm. And so what you're trying to do is maintain the power, but make it easier to work with for people that might only be interacting with pieces of it.
I think so. Yeah. And I think the size of the company does still come into account where if you have, maybe one HR person and they're able to talk one-on-one with everyone at your company who may have an issue or need help with a tool or needs help navigating it, then that's fine. But that stops scaling at some point. So I think it also comes into play there too.
One thing that we had talked about before this conversation is where are HR leaders overestimating what their tools can do and where are they underestimating what they should be building? And I really appreciated your response there. Could you share more about your thoughts on that?
I think for the question of where are people overestimating versus underestimating these tools, if you're talking about sort of AI native tools specifically, it's really hard for me to pinpoint a threshold there that's not going to be totally out of date a week from now. These things are changing so quickly. And my team talks a lot about, we're engineers and we're using Codex and OpenAI's models to write code. And that's an example where an engineer on my team might have a sense of what is doable or not doable with Codex today. And they might be right, but that might change a week from now, literally week over week. So in the AI landscape, I think the key really has to be just continually checking in and rechecking your assumptions and then sharing that with the rest of your team. But in the realm of traditional non-AI enabled systems, for me, I think the biggest underestimation that I've made in the past is around, again, that sort of deep configurability to meet all kinds of different business process requirements and compliance requirements. Those are the things that I've really come to appreciate in those systems and realize that I can't be so cavalier about saying, oh yeah, we can take a couple of engineers and go replicate that. Because maybe we can, given enough time, but it never feels like differentiated work either. And it's really hard to get right and obviously very critical to get right. Because then if you have problems, then those are problems. Yeah.
And for the listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with Codex, if you know Claude and Claude Code, Codex is OpenAI's equivalent of that. So it's on the more coding side of things. Just to put a fine point on what you're saying, what I think was really powerful in that is just how quickly these things are changing, and what might seem like a definitive answer today might shift in a few weeks or a few months. And so to be open and willing to come back to the solutions and see where really are the lines being redrawn. One of the things that I thought was really incredible about your role too is you've mentioned just how much HR people on your team who are non-engineers within the HR space are becoming builders, and more so over time. What has that actually looked like within OpenAI for folks who maybe hadn't built things before to start to get more and more familiar with these tools? And how's your team supported them in that?
I think we're very fortunate at OpenAI to obviously have a really strong mandate from, I mean, top down, but from all sides around like, you should be using this, you should be curious about this stuff. Everyone who joins OpenAI should be curious about it on some level and want to work on these things. So if your organization doesn't have that, I recommend finding ways to kind of spark that. But that's where it really starts, is just with curiosity and with people realizing that they have the tools available and we don't worry too much about budgets for these things and stuff like that. Again, I know we're special, but that's what it really starts, is helping people think in a very unconstrained way about what is like the gold star kind of pie in the sky version of what you want to do. Think about that kind of divorced from all the realities of the systems that you know about and how messy it is to kind of pull that stuff together. But we really try to have people start from just, if I could design the end user interface that I want to see, what is that? And having that come from the domain experts is really, really valuable. And then I think a lot of the hard work comes in engaging with these domain experts and helping them understand the building blocks that my team has available to help them make that a reality. So that's when you have to start to understand, okay, this piece of data lives here and it has these security or access restrictions, and this piece of data lives here, and you have to stitch them together. And then what type of tool is this even? Is this a dashboard that lives inside your business analytics tool if it's like kind of a more data heavy thing? Is it like a full interactive web app, in which case you need somewhere to host it? Maybe it's actually like a plugin or a skill for ChatGPT where people access it that way. So that's where I find we spend most of our time, is in sort of taking these pie in the sky ideas and these like ideal kind of best case ideas and concepts and helping people prototype them, but then really figure out, okay, here are the building blocks and here's what's realistic for how we can stitch those together into, 80% of what you're dreaming of and make those trade-offs.
That really feels like a muscle that needs to be built over time. For context, I am a failed SaaS founder. I tried to bootstrap a AI-enabled performance management tool that would listen in on executive team meetings, project meetings, one-on-ones, capture that unstructured data and put it into a format where senior leaders could figure out what's going on in their org. As a non-technical founder, as a HR leader, I thought, well, it just makes sense. Like, do this. I'll hand it to a product engineering person and they will bring it to life. Well, all of the little decisions along the way, like what's the size of the font and where should the button be and exactly what word do you use for this? And not to mention the more technical decisions about like, what's the back end? How is the data structured? How do you stitch these tools together in a way that doesn't result in being overcomplicated or too expensive? I spent 2.5 years failing at that. I'm wondering, like, how is the team building that muscle? Is this a group that it's just more native to, more natural than? Is your group educating them in some way and giving them parameters to work within? Like,
I think you're totally right that it's a muscle. I think it's one that is really native to a lot of engineers, and a lot of engineers, that's what your training is in doing this and figuring out the right abstractions and how to tie things together and reason about, data flow through all these systems and things like that. So the engineering background helps, but when I talk to an HRBP or a recruiting leader or something, and when we're talking about their prototype and their idea, I'm helping them break these things down before we're even talking about this system has to make an API request to this system. It's more conceptual than that, I think, to start. And that's, I think, a place where teams like mine can provide better building blocks, things like MCP servers, if these are like model context protocol servers where you can plug these into ChatGPT or Claude and they provide context to the model kind of coming from your system. Those are leverage points where teams like mine can build more paved paths and better building blocks that are more legible and easier for people to understand how they kind of fit together. So to give like a concrete example, maybe you have to draw data from your applicant tracking system and from your performance management system to see, okay, here's the signals we got at hire time, and then here's how this person performed over time. The sort of default naive approach, they would make API calls to both of those systems, stitch the data together themselves, and then go and run with that. But maybe for this population that actually would want to build these things, maybe the solution is for a team like mine to build sort of a unified data access point where you just have one concept of a person and they have an application history and an employment history. And so they're able to then go and build off of that in a much more tangible way or without having to think about some of those lower level details.
I guess playing that back, what I'm hearing is that the difference is that you have a personal trainer inside OpenAI, the workforce, and that's you and your team. Instead of me as a technical founder trying to stumble my way through working with contractors and vendors and offshore resources and trying to teach myself along the way, you have someone who's working alongside you at the same organization, who's done it many, many, many times, that is already vetted and trusted, and you clearly have the same interests. And so that personal trainer will help you frame up the work and very quickly tell you this is doable or this is harder. Maybe that just speaks to, I don't know if this is a question, Dylan. I think more so I'm calling out like what might be special here is that embedded team, which is yours, to help the group build something really useful and decide when it doesn't make sense to build something.
I think that is true, but also to be candid, that's already not scaling for my team. The size of the HR team, the size of the recruiting team are much larger than my team. And I probably will log off of this Zoom and get a bunch of Slacks of like, hey, I have this idea for this, or I built this prototype, and it's definitely not scaling already. It's infectious energy. It's really fun, but we do have to find ways to scale that. And what I am hopeful about is that the lessons that we are learning on my team, we're also feeding back into the OpenAI product teams to help them understand, here are how people are really struggling with these things, and here are the abstractions that my team has had to build that would be better suited as first-party abstractions inside of ChatGPT or Codex. And there are all kinds of other teams similar to mine that are doing the same thing. There's a marketing innovation team, there's a support automation team, there's a finance innovation team, things like this, where they're all learning these lessons from their domain stakeholders, and in the best case scenario, feeding this back into ChatGPT, the product. And this is something we're really keen on doing internally. So I would hope that over time, this is going to get easier and easier for people outside of OpenAI or Anthropic to be able to do based on what we're learning internally.
I love that there's this desire to be dog fooding, right? And it's by having these engineering product design teams sit with every single department within the organization or with most of the departments in the organization. I have one question that hadn't come up before, but as I'm thinking about it, if I'm listening to this podcast, listening to you and being like, oh my gosh, it'd be so amazing if I had a Dylan inside my organization, but we don't. And so I'm here vibe coding or like working with ChatGPT. What are some considerations I should think about to take something from like, I've built a prototype, I have something that's kind of working. Like, what are some of the things that maybe are on my checklist to take it from a thing that I am playing with and seems maybe decent to, hey, I want to roll it out to my entire organization as a tool that we are using?
Where I see this happening at OpenAI, where there are people on the recruiting and HR teams that are champions for these things themselves. And so even without, my involvement or my team's involvement, there are folks like that are taking these things forward. And my recommendations there would be, one, to spend a lot of time dog fooding yourself and get it to the point where you're using it in your day-to-day if you're the one that prototyped it and you're really honing in on sort of something that's working for you. And then try to get, a couple of other people in the loop and see how it works for them and see what kind of needs to generalize. Beyond that, I think it's really a question of just what is everyone else's appetite for using tools like this? And I think that gets at like, just how do you do good product development and find something that people want? And from a technical perspective, there's also, limitations where maybe you're able to do it with sample data or dummy data or a subset of your production data. There, that I guess becomes an IT question of how do you scale up from there? And that's going to be solution specific, but it really starts with like that person putting their product management hat on and first being their own customer and then, expand the circle to a few kind of trusted testers and then go outward from there until you reach people who might be skeptical or might not know that they even want or need this thing.
I love that. So it's like, take the thing you've built, bring in a few initial first users, then have a pilot, maybe expand your pilot and go in almost concentric circles to get bigger and bigger until you span. But I'm not hearing Dylan say here, take your thing and then roll it out to the whole company and see what happens, but take a step-by-step approach.
Yeah, I think when you go straight to the whole company, that is a way to find out who are the eager early adopters and who are so excited to use this thing that they're kind of ripping it out of your hands and using it before it's fully polished. So it is a good way to identify that, but it can also be confusing for folks where they're not those early adopters, or they're like, I just need to do my job and I need tools that are going to work for me. They may not respond well to that right away. So yeah, I think finding those early adopters is really important.
Dylan, as you've talked about how it's not scalable with all the ideas that are pouring in and all the team members that have things that they would love to have built or would like to experiment with, I'm wondering how you and your org filter that to ensure that the things that are being built with time really being invested in it is spent on things that are likely to be really useful rather than flights of fancy or nice to haves. Have you gotten to that stage where you are filtering, and what are some of the criteria that you're using on that?
We definitely are doing that. I do encourage everyone in those early stages or in that sort of like broad-based way to really lean into building and creating whatever they want. I think creating a positive culture around that is really important to just inspire people and to give them permission to build these things. My team does look at things that people have built and figure out, oh, maybe we need some more guardrails here, or maybe this is a tool that my team needs to take over or productionize because it is going to need to work with very sensitive data or is going to need very high uptime requirements or things like that. So we do look and kind of pull out those things where necessary, but we start by trying to have everyone feel really inspired and empowered to build these things. But I think what we've done is essentially figured out a classification system where we know, okay, is this more of kind of a data analytics reporting tool where that person can iterate using data that they have access to within like our BI system? Okay, great. Like they can go ahead and do that. Is this, someone on the employee relations team that's building a tool for HR investigations? Okay, that's maybe one that we should dig into some more and make sure is really, really secure. So we start to have these kind of facets or cuts that we do where a lot of it comes down to, are you dealing with the data that is, part of your role or more broad-based data sets? And then does this need to be very secure and accessed by a lot of people? That's where some of the engineering needs to come in, I think.
I guess I'm drawing a connection to way back in the day at General Electric, we were trying to roll out Six Sigma and encouraging everybody to use it. But then it was slowing things down and becoming bureaucratic because everybody was trying to make everything a project, the Six Sigma project. And at some point we developed a rubric that said, like, this is a project, just use the tools for the second category. And this third category is just do it. Just do the thing and you don't need to do anything special. And then Jess and I just had a conversation with AJ Thomas, formerly of Google X, Moonshot Factory, where she was the head of HR and talent there. And she talked about running experiments with very, very clear kill criteria early on. So like when to know to stop investing in something and shift your resources into something else. So I wonder if there's a facet at OpenAI right now where it is like all wide open. You have great funding, tons of growth. You're trying to drive a curious mindset. If the aperture is probably more open right now at OpenAI than it might be at another organization that has more constraints. You're trying to build a culture at this point as much as you're trying to build useful tools.
It's very true. Yeah. But I think security is really the thing we always come back to, where yes, we want 1,000 flowers to bloom, but we also have a really strong security culture. And that's not something that these builders on the HR team are trying to skirt around. It's just that they need support there when that becomes a factor. And so, yeah, for us, like that tends to be the limiting factor. Usually when I look back at sort of what we've worked on is people can build, and then my team is helping productionize things. And that critical path is usually sort of limited by what can we ship, very securely and very robustly.
On that topic, who are the other stakeholders who are involved in like that security element? Is there like legal counterparts or IT or maybe even a dedicated security team that come into play? And at what point in the process are they being pulled in?
Yeah, we have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of partners that we work with on this. We have a fantastic dedicated security team that will do kind of standard application security reviews with us. So helping my team as an engineering team just build software in a secure way. That's a practice that we follow kind of all the time with them. There's also, like you mentioned, kind of employment legal folks or privacy legal folks where they have better guidance around the data handling and how we store and for what purposes we can use certain data. There's also AI safety where it's, do you have an agent that is able to, for example, automatically reach out and contact people outside your organization, say candidates or sales prospects or something. There are whole teams that are focused on guardrails and decisions kind of around that. We try to talk to all of those folks as early in the process as possible. And I think that's another place where we're lucky at OpenAI, where, if I go and talk to our legal team, they want to hear, what is my gold star, like best idea that I have? And we want to work backwards from that so they can really understand what is it that we're trying to accomplish. And if they can see that, maybe the implementation looks a little bit different than we originally ideated on, but they can at least understand the North Star that we're trying to get to, help us understand kind of the risks along the way. And then leadership helps us make the risk trade-off. But we try to bring them in as early as possible, always.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think for our listeners, what's helpful is just to hear they may not have every single stakeholder that you just mentioned in their organizations, but just even to be thinking about, hey, here are the considerations as I am building things. Many listeners are coming from smaller organizations. And I think this is a helpful guide of just, okay, here are just the areas that we need to be mindful of, because it seems fun to vibe code and be like, here's a new tool, and not even have that on the radar. So appreciate you and listing that out, because I think it's so helpful to bring that onto the radar for them.
In the best case scenario, you talk to these folks and they say, that sounds really cool. Come and talk to me when you're starting to think about X, Y, or Z. And so you just have those people in your mind to go to, and the thresholds that they care about.
If I were to change topics for just a moment, and you mentioned just how fast all of these models are changing, and the things that don't seem possible right now might be possible in another week or a month or a few months. What are some things that HR teams are still doing manually today that might feel ridiculous in a couple of years from now?
I can think of a few kind of classes of things. One that we found a lot of success with helping to automate is around just the general concept of kind of auditing. So you have organizational changes, you have employees being hired, and there's data being transferred from one system to another. I think what I've seen in working with our HR ops and recruiting ops teams is that a lot of their work is reviewing changes that are happening and making sure that they follow our policies or that edge cases are accounted for correctly. And I think that's a place where AI can really help assist them. And it's not always going to be replacing them in that kind of audit flow, but it is helping surface discrepancies or help them comb through a large data set to understand, here's everything that looks like totally by the book, based on our policies, but here are the edge cases that we actually want you to focus on. That's one where I feel like a lot of the manual work is hopefully going to go away, and we're trying to eliminate it at OpenAI. Another one is around just that information retrieval class of problems where it's, hey, I'm about to meet with this person that I support as an HRBP. What have they been working on lately? Or what is the organizational context in which they operate right now? Or I think that the default way that I might do that is, go search through Slack, go search through Google Drive and what have you. And that's another sort of class of work that I think can be really shortened by AI tools.
Dylan, as we continue to explore building and creating, it can often be helpful to identify some of those traps in the path. What have you seen as being a typical failure risk for HR teams and builders when they try to implement something new?
One of the biggest ones that I have seen is excitement happening around a new tool where there isn't the operational support for that tool really slotting in, being useful to people from a workflow perspective. And I'll give you an example to try to make that a little bit more concrete. We have an executive recruiting team at OpenAI. It's a very different sort of motion than the scaled recruiting that a lot of the recruiting org does. And I had some conversations with our executive recruiting team where they wanted us to build a really kind of AI native CRM for them to track their interactions with their candidates. And in talking to them about this, we learned that this team of executive recruiters, they actually all operate very differently, and that's necessary for their roles. And they're all working in very different domains for these executives that they're trying to hire. And there's really no guarantee that if we were to build this thing for these people, they would all automatically snap into using this tool in a consistent way. Maybe if we built something that was just so good and so compelling and so innovative that they really wanted to use it, then maybe that would be a different story. But if we were to build anything, relatively standard or that got the job done or was the 80% solution, there was just no guarantee that they would all start to use it and change their workflows around it. So that's one where I feel like teams like mine have to partner very deeply with these operations teams so that we can be sure that the processes will support the introduction of a new tool like this.
It sounds like making sure that the tool works for a broader population rather than the one core builder. When I look back on my SaaS rabbit hole, maybe that was the challenge there. Like I was building something I thought was great, but the world wasn't ready for it yet. And so ensuring that you have your population identified that needs to use it.
And the operational support. Another example I can give is we have a referrals tool internally where employees can refer candidates. And one of the innovations, I guess, that we shipped as part of this tool is you used to have to refer someone into a specific role. Now you can refer someone without a role attached, where you're just saying, hey, I don't know what roles we have open, but this person is great. I really want them to work here. I really think we should interview them for something. Let's get them into the process. And so you can refer someone without a role. We have an AI system that figures out what some of the top roles might be for this person to interview with. And then our recruiting operations team is actually working with recruiters to finally kind of like land those people into different tracks and have those conversations. But if those just went into a black hole and we didn't have recruiting ops actually taking that last mile step, then the tool wouldn't be delivering value at all. So you have to have the operational support sometimes to back these things to make them really effective.
How should HR leaders be thinking differently about experimentation versus scaling?
It's a good question. I go back to something that an engineering leader once told me a long time ago that's really stuck with me, which is that in their view, they said their definition of a healthy team of any kind is one where you're obviously executing very well on your core priorities and doing what you need to do, but you also have some percentage of your time always reserved for this more innovative work where it's not on your roadmap. It's not a deliverable. It's not something that anybody's asking you to do on a specific timeline, but it's time that you have to prototype and iterate and just use your own brain around sort of what am I seeing as an employee? How do I think we can just think of something totally new that nobody is asking us for? And for that sort of slice of innovation time, you have to be prepared for some of those things to fail. And it has to be okay, kind of by definition, for some of those things to fail. But if you hit on something there, that's something that you hit on that wasn't on your roadmap. And so it can be really beneficial in that way.
I love that because there's an intentionality to carve out time for it. I think what this leader gave you was it is a fundamental piece of building that you need to have some amount of time for that experimentation, but it needs to be intentional.
And it's hard to dedicate that time and protect that time, but some slice of time for that is really healthy.
I know we're getting close to the end of our time together. Would love to move to our accelerator round questions. And so here's the first question, and that is learning. What recommendations do you have for our audience of mostly mid to senior level HR leaders? If you could recommend only 2 resources, a person, a book, a newsletter, whatever, what sources would make the cut?
One of them is a book called Scaling People. It's by Claire Hughes Johnson. I was really fortunate to work with and learn from her at Stripe when she was the COO there. And what I love about her book is it is extremely concrete and tactical about practices that she put into place at Stripe to help scale the company from a planning perspective, a management perspective. And so when I read through this book, I recognize a lot of the practices that I saw working on the ground at Stripe. So that's one that I really recommend. And then one maybe more on the technical side, there's a guy called Simon Willison who has a blog, and within sort of the AI sphere, he's become really well recognized for being sort of a neutral third party who is sort of commentating on all of these releases from all of these AI labs. And he does so in a way that's very objective. He has a pulse on what are the latest things that Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, all of these labs are releasing. And that's one that I keep coming back to just to get the latest on where is the industry right now and what these models can do. It does get pretty technical, but I think if you just follow the posts around the latest model releases and his impressions on those, that's for me like a shortcut for understanding what are the capability jumps that are happening across all these labs.
We could use the shortcut because things are moving fast.
Yeah, you're not alone there. Yeah.
Next accelerator round question. I know you're not an HR person. Most of our audience is. If you were able to give our audience one sentence of advice about how to grow their careers, what would it be?
I think especially right now, it's just be curious and have a builder's mindset. If you have an idea, figure out how to build it. There's probably a way. And I think there's just never been a better time to have that mindset than right now.
Last question, and that is, assuming our listeners are wowed by you, I sure am, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I am on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my email is dylan@openai.com if you want to reach out.
Dylan, amazing. You were amazing then. You're even more amazing now. I'm so glad that you were able to come on and join us on the PLA podcast. Thank you for all your insights, your wisdom, your experience that you've been sharing. It's wonderful to reconnect, and I'm so glad that you're able to connect with our listeners today.
Thank you so much. This is super fun. Thank you for having me.